Hello, and welcome all of you to this public lecture series on pathways and paradigms for India's G20 presidency. Today, we take a closer look at South Asia, a region that has one of the largest number of poor in the world, a region that faces turbulence from frequent natural calamities, social tensions, rising food and fuel prices, yet holds the promises of favorable demography and abundant natural resources. The region is also in India's immediate neighborhood and looks upon India's growth story with expectation. India also espouses neighborhood first policy. How would India navigate the traditional concerns and barriers and fast forward the emergence of South Asia? To talk to us on all of this, I'm joined by Professor Amitabh Mattu, a leading voice in international security in India's foreign policy. Professor Amitabh Mattu is currently chairperson at the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University at New Delhi. Professor Mattu has been the founding director of Australia India Institute and also serves as honorary professor at the Faculty of Arts, University of Melbourne. Formerly, Professor Mattu was the Vice Chancellor of University of Jammu and acquired the distinction of being the youngest Vice Chancellor of a public university of independent India. For his seminal contribution, Professor Mattu was awarded the Padam Shri, one of India's highest civilian awards. Besides holding several prestigious positions in the international and national academic and government institutions, he has been the cabinet rank advisor to Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mattu.
Thank you.
Professor Mattu, we'll feel privileged to have you here. Please deliver your lecture on conflict resolution, peace building and leadership, India, G20, and fast forwarding the emergence of South Asia. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamid, first of all, for inviting me and for your very kind and generous introduction. And also to Professor Kumaraswamy, who said that he will be here but not enter here because he has to manage the back office, as it were. So Kumaraswamy and I have known each other since we were hostelers in Purvanchal Hostel, Brahmaputra Hostel. And I want to specially recognize Professor Huck, a distinguished former professor of sociology at JNU, and someone who was an extremely generous, lovable warden of ours in Periyar Hostel. He used to take his white Pomeranian, I think it was, for a walk every day, and I have great memories of those evening walks and learning from those anecdotes and that wisdom. So it's a great privilege to see you here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm also delighted that there are students, my colleagues, my faculty members all here. And I'm also delighted that you've had this huge spread of lectures over the last 2 weeks.
15 days.
15 days. You've heard what some might say is the best and the brightest of SIS, from Professor Emeritus to other distinguished professors. So today, I'm afraid you'll hear from not so very best and not so very bright. The best and the brightest was, of course, a book written by Arthur Schlesinger Jr. to describe the 1,000 days of the Jack Kennedy administration, which is often described as the Camelot years. So I may not be part of that Camelot, but my subject, which may seem tangential to the whole G20 high table and ethos, is, I feel, central to all our concerns. Let's face it that since the 1950s, never before has India quite had the influence that it has currently on the international system. If there is any scholar from Japanese studies here, is there anyone who does East Asia? There isn't. But in Japan, in Japanese, you don't need to be a Japanese scholar for the example that I'm giving you, but there is a style of writing poetry called a haiku, which is a full line poem with a certain meter and a certain rhyme and a certain sound that come across. And one of the most famous poems is called The Old Pond. And I try to kind of rephrase the old pond in today's G20 and the impact that India is having. Old pond, a lion jumps in, the water roars. So, of course, in the original poem, it's oh, there comes our distinguished East Asian scholar and chairperson of the Center for East Asian Studies. We were, I was just trying to replay my view of a haiku poem. Alkaji, please give me the privilege of your sitting here. So there is a old haiku poem. There's someone, aapko Japanese, you know Japanese? No. He's Korean, sorry. East Asia always confused me. But anyway, there's a haiku poem which is called Old Pond. It's one of the most famous poems. It's about an old pond. A frog jumps in. Something, the water makes a sound, right? Said today in the context of the G20, old pond, a lion jumps in, the water roars. India's influence could be measured in terms of that haiku poem. A young and an ancient economic power with huge human resources and a robust diaspora with tremendous material and indeed moral power. India is uniquely positioned today to not only dine with the high powers, which it is going to dine with the high powers, dine at the high table with the big powers in the next few days. Every five-star hotel in this city has been booked. And what amazes me is that information is now freely available. So someone sent me a description of who's going to be staying at what. I thought I might as well, at the end of this session, probably do a trivia quiz to find out where do you think Joe Biden is going to be staying? And if Xi Jinping were to come, where would he stay? So this is actual fact. Joe Biden is staying in the ITC Moria. She, if he had turned up, would stay in the Taj Palace. Unfortunately, the French have decided on the Claridge's for some reason. But every hotel you can know, I know the Taj Mansingh, my favorite hotel, has been taken by the Emirates. So these are people who are going to be dining at the high table. But given India's influence and given India's positioning and given what India represents now and in the past, I think it can also, at this moment of time, learn to speak for the subalterns. Learn to speak for those marginal to the high table. And that is why I brought in the whole image of South Asia. In fact, my talk in its original avatar didn't have G20 on it. And then Dr. Hamid disciplined me and said, every title has to have the word G20. So I had to reconfigure my talk to suit the lecture or the series of lectures which are all positioned to the G20. Since this is an IR audience primarily, I thought that one of the ways to begin with, and that's the only way in which you can really engage scholars like yourself, is to look at how India's G20 engagement could be looked at through the various spectacles of IR theories. What would realists say? What would liberals say? What would constructivists say? What would critical theorists? What would people who are focused on just peace and conflict studies or regional integration studies, how would they view India's engagement with the G20? Realism is the easiest, and in its parsimony, it conveniently hides the complexity that we are all familiar with. But so realism would tell you that G20 can be seen as a strategic move for India to enhance its material interests, its national interests, expand its power. It'll do so by building alliances, formally and informally, hedging or bandwagoning, or balancing, in this case, potentially China. And I'm delighted that, without embarrassing her, that Professor Alkacharya is here. Liberalism would see G20 as a institution building mechanism, that India's intervention, India's participation, India's engagement would be a way in which you strengthen multilateral cooperation and through through the participation initially the strongest economies, but probably expanding this cooperation to those less fortunate than to be in the most advanced economies in the world. And that is something that Professor Negi can enlighten you about. I think what we lack in SIS often is, and I think we were at one stage willing to break those silos, is that people from all across our various centers who have the expertise come together and try and tell us what are the kind of spectacles, lenses through which we can approach common problems, because that is the great strength of SIS, unlike the strength of social sciences or languages. A German can't tell you how to teach French, but a East Asian studies scholar can tell me how do you read China, because China is as important for me in terms of Indian foreign policy as would be the United States. Hopefully those things will change. But what would a constructivist, and if there are constructivists in this room, because constructivism, at least the last time I read theory, was still fashionable, what would a constructivist view it? Constructivists would view these as artificial creations of realists and liberalists, but that would emphasize the fact that your norms matter, your values matter, and what matters most of all is the social interactions within the framework of international relations, and that G20 is an opportunity for India to shape and influence global norms, um, uh, even challenge existing power structures, promote more inclusive decision-making processes, as it has been trying to do within the United Nations Security Council for the reforms that it has been advocating. And Professor Negi is writing our first CPOD policy brief on the need for reforms. And when the Young Scholars Conference is going to be convened on the 7th of October, next month, that paper is going to be released. So I've already announced it. Regionalism and peace and conflict studies would look at potential ways again of in some ways being adjunct to constructivism, but looking at how regions, and in this context South Asia, can be an adjunct, can play an important role in the larger normative framework of the G20, and India can be an instrument through which this regionalism can be promoted. And finally, a discipline that I grew up with, which was very engaging when I studied it, which was peace and conflict studies. And both the Vice Chancellor and I, in separate years, went to the University of Uppsala, spent a summer learning all the trades, all the skills of trying to be peace researchers. And peace and conflict studies would say that it's important to engage with conflicts, marginal as they may seem, because often dormant problems can then become malignant, and it's important to address these issues even as we build a normative framework. So while we look at G20 and India's engagement with through these different lenses, and these are primarily Western lenses. These are you might have a copycat Indian version, or you might say that India discovered realism before the West did, or Cortella predated Machiavelli or predated Hobbes by several centuries. Similarly, in terms of liberalism, that we built institutions of knowledge, of cooperation much before the West knew what cooperation was all about, much before the Industrial Revolution. But there is an Indian thinking, and it is at this moment of time, people are focusing, and rightly so. It is not a return to nativism, or it's not a return to necessarily try and suggest that we are exceptional people, but that going back to our roots and our thought and our thinking and our ideas may help, that recovery may help the world at large. And that's why the slogan of the G20 is Vasudeva Kutumbakam. The world is one family. It's an ancient Indian idea that emphasizes both interconnectedness and independence, interconnectedness and interdependence of all humanity, promoting a sense of global unity and shared responsibility. It suggests at its very root, and I can during the discussion actually tell you the exact shlokas which from the Upanishads, from the Puranas, which describe it in greater detail, that all individuals, irrespective of where they were born, whatever being their primordial identities, are part of one large family. And therefore, the whole slogan, as I said, one earth, one family, one future, is rooted in this grand idea. And this is not, unless you begin to think that this is a mere posturing, this is not a realist idea, but this is an idea which is closest in some ways to a constructivist view, a peace and conflict strategy view, but also closest to what has been special about India. Now, in terms of, I can expand on what all these different uh, 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 factors mean in greater detail. Uh, Interconnectedness means that every individual and nation is interconnected. The butterfly effect, that linear, that do in complex systems, even the smallest effect have much more than just linear impacts. A butterfly's wings, in a metaphor, which is not a real example, a butterfly wings can create a tornado like impact in a different part of the world. The smallest, if you have a complex intersystem, a complex system which is interdependent on each other, then even the smallest, most trivial occasion, event can generate a ripple which could be unforeseen. This interconnectedness extends beyond geographical boundaries and therefore emphasizes the need for cooperation and collaboration. The second is universal sisterhood. The concept which promotes a sense of universal sisterhood where individuals view each other as a part of a family, including encouraging mutual respect, empathy, and compassion for all. And this leads to the idea of shared responsibility. Vasudev Kutumbakam highlights the idea that all individuals share a collective responsibility for the welfare of the world. It encourages individuals and nations to work together. It gives you agency. It empowers you in believing that you can actually make a difference. Of course, it goes without saying that one of the important axioms of Vasudev Kutumbakam is peaceful coexistence, ethical conduct, and finally global stewardship. The concept encourages individuals and nations to be responsible stewards of the planet. It emphasizes the need for a non anthropocentric view of the world, for sustainable development, for environmental conservation, and the protection of natural resources for the benefit of present and future generations. In one Kashmiri Sufi thinker called Nund Rishi, Sheikh Nuruddin Nurani, said, "We shall survive." In Kashmiri, there was this saying, "Wak," we shall survive only as long as the forests do. And we shall survive as only a family until the last member feels empowered. These are actual sayings from different parts of India which flow into this whole idea. The message, of course, flows from our great epics, including the Mahabharata, and to do a pre-launch advertisement for our book, Amrita Nalekar, Aruna Nalekar, and myself have written a book on the Mahabharata and the ethical conduct and strategic choices, which will be available hopefully in middle of November. I would suggest all of you look at it and buy it if you want to. And of course, through Vasudev Kutumbakam is the whole idea of a Vishwa Guru, a world teacher, that India has the responsibility, therefore, given all this, given all the cultural, civilizational knowledge that we have at our disposal, to share this knowledge, wisdom, and cultural heritage with the world. And that G20 gives us an opportunity to fulfill this role by contributing these perspectives on peace, sustainable development, and I dare say, even spirituality. India may help to shape G20's agenda by emphasizing the importance of even holistic well being, environmental stewardship, and social harmony. So, and these are not just the Mahabharata. But if you look at other examples, and I just looked anecdotally and spoke to my friend Hiraman Tiwari, who's the professor of history and Sanskrit in this university, and he gave me 4 or 5 examples. For instance, the conversation, of course, which is well known, the dialogue between Arjun and Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and King Harishchandra's sense of integrity as a way of prioritizing ethical conduct among leaders. Of course, again, Chanakya's leadership and statecraft is well known. The Jataka tales, Buddhism's most important, arguably, gift to our thinking about compassion, kindness, and selflessness, based on the life of the Buddha himself. And finally, of course, is the whole idea, again drawn from the Bhagavatam, which is of Krishna's life and his friendship with Sudama, who neither in stature nor in means is equal to Krishna. But both Sudama's love and devotion to his friend despite his own poverty, and Krishna's sense of complete devotion again to Sudama, had built a relationship based on mutual strengths, but also driven by a great sense of humility. In other words, today, India can foster a culture of empathy, collaboration, and gratitude at a time when South Asia seems marginal, when the dominant argument seems to be that we should bypass South Asia, that South Asia is a millstone which hangs around our neck, that Pakistan is a lost cause, that Sri Lanka might be recoverable as long as it doesn't fall into Chinese hands, that the Nepalese, for all that we did for them, still seem ungrateful. This is the kind of parochial view of South Asia. And look at Bangladesh, even after we liberated them, they still have a schizophrenic identity. Even Bhutan is cozying up to China and exercising its own sovereignty. So, in that narrow mindset, it's important to re-emphasize that South Asia, the demographics of South Asia, the potential economic prowess of South Asia need not be a millstone around India, even as it leads the G20. And notwithstanding the spectacles through which you look at this region, I believe that you can make an argument from the perspective of both realism, from liberal institutionalism, from constructivism, from the potential of regional integration, and from the potential of both in peace and conflict resolution, especially at a time when most South Asian countries, including, I dare say, if you read the Pakistani papers, recognize that India is overtaken them in a shape and manner that even ganging up against India, as they used to do in the SAARC forums, is no longer going to work. That even the idea of market access to India is a magnet strong enough for them to overlook many of the bilateral contentious issues. And I say this is even true about Pakistan, given the abyss in which it is today, given the near economic collapse, given the internecine religious conflicts, given the balkanization that is happening in Pakistan. And India can conduct this, take South Asia with it, through a framework that I've always believed in is dialogue and diplomacy, and a word which has, of course, now got completely cliched, but still matters: confidence building measures, regional integration and cooperation, economic partnerships, and bilateral symmetry. I am one of those who believes that in the first term, Prime Minister Modi conquered India. In the second term, he's conquered the world. In his third term, he'll conquer South Asia. And conquer is not an aggressive, expansionist, imperialist term. It's conquering the hearts and minds. 9 years ago, Prime Minister Modi was seen as a chief minister from outside, a usurper in Lutyens, Delhi, with no friends and allies. The US had denied him a visa. I was in Australia. Australia saw him as almost a pariah at that stage. Today, he's feted all around the world. He is the most popular leader of all major leaders anywhere in the world. The kind of confidence that the people of India have in him is unmatched by any other leader anywhere in the world. Here is a person who can make a difference now to the destiny of South Asia. And I genuinely believe that it is that the time has come, and it is in his character to do so, because only he, despite what people might say, he makes all the decisions finally, whether it's on foreign policy or economic policy, and he has the agency and the space and the autonomy to be able to do so. So while I suggest to you that India today is, through whatever lens that you look at it, not on the verge or not on the cusp of a takeoff, but has really taken off. And the splendor, grand splendor of the G20, which might still be outside our doors, and JNU might seem marginal to that project, because we still seem to be caught in times of the past. But given the splendor, given what's happening in New Delhi, and you, frankly speaking, all naysayers should actually take a walk, as I did, with the architect who designed the new Central Vista and the Parliament, and my friend, as a witness and as a collaborator, was Professor Sani. So we walked through Central Vista, saw part of what Parliament is going to look like. The amazing vision of looking beyond imperial India, because we're getting rid and building a new parliament and getting rid of many of the old buildings, or not getting rid, but marginalizing them, is also a statement in saying we have moved beyond our colonial times. Similarly, as he leads the G20, he can lead South Asia. And remember, in my understanding and in my vision, newspaper writers, academics, think tankers are way behind what most leaders are thinking, way behind their thinking, way behind their audacity or chutzpah, way behind the out of the box of ideas that they will champion. And I have dealt with prime ministers like Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, and less so with Prime Minister Modi, but we are far behind what they're thinking. No one could have imagined that Prime Minister Modi would suddenly land from Kabul to Nawaz Sharif for Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter's wedding and to wish him happy birthday. It turned out to be an event that didn't produce the desirable results, but a person who has the audacity to do this has the audacity to create the conditions for peace in South Asia tomorrow, even while India becomes the undisputed leader of the democratic world, along with perhaps the United States, if it still is democracy, in the future. And believe me, that when that happens, every single person in this room and every single person, whether they sit in Akbar Road or Jhandewala, will agree with Prime Minister Modi, because they will realize that is the way forward. Manish and Abhishek, that's a challenge for both of you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mattu, for throwing light that Vasudeva Kutumbakam is rooted deeply in Indian traditions, and there are several reasons to believe that India would deliver on that. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I can see the eager faces. So, with your permission, can we invite a few questions?
Please.
Please raise your hands and make your questions short and possibly one, so that I can see a lot of people want to ask question to. Yes.
Sorry. Yes, sir. Sir, my question to you is that sir, you said in the third term, our Prime Minister has got the audacity to conquer South Asia. But sir, to conquer South Asia, isn't it necessary to have constant engagement with Pakistan and China, because China also has a strong influence in South Asia, and its influence is only growing. now with India not engaging with Pakistan and China expanding its influence in South Asia in terms of its recent engagement with Nepal in the Agniveer policy also the China is taking advantage of that policy, and now Nepal also over the years have tilted towards China. So how do you think that without engaging with Pakistan that India can envision to be leader of South Asia and counter the Chinese influence? Thank you.
This is an important question. I think I'll answer it because Shaurya has raised an important question. I made it clear to you, Shaurya, in my lecture that I think this is being done. Obviously, there were, in the first term, there were various strands working, but this is, I see it as sequential in terms of Prime Minister Modi's leadership. Uh, of course, as I said, in the first term, there were all three strands working: domestic, global, and regional. But in the first term, he's consolidated his position as the most powerful leader in India, which was certified, endorsed in the second election, which I think will be endorsed in the third election. It's not because of my support, it's because what the evidence on the ground suggests. The second term was, and the process began in the first term of actually engaging with the rest of the world. I saw him when he came to Australia. I hosted him when he came to Australia. The electrifying impact that he had there from someone who had been denied a visa in the United States and Australia and most of the European countries, including the United Kingdom. Of course, capitalism works on the basis of self-interest, and they saw the Indian market, they saw a potential balancer to China, but there was also the factor of the Indian diaspora, which was working even in small countries like Australia. The diaspora was seen as a millstone around India's neck for a long time. Today, every joint secretary and above in the MEA, anywhere he goes, his first task is to have a meeting with the diaspora. Every cabinet minister says, I don't care if I get a minister with the prime minister, will the overseas Indians, will I get a chance to meet that constituency? The American diaspora, Indian American diaspora is the strongest, most influential from the valley to the beltway of Washington, D.C. But in every country, the diaspora is feeling more empowered. And to a point where you have now, not just because of diasporic reasons, but because of Prime Minister Modi's own image. Look, I'm being an academic here about it. I'm not saying normatively whether it's good or bad. The fact is that if you have the Prime Minister or head of state of a South Pacific island state come and touch Prime Minister Modi's feet, who's that? What was it, Vanuatu or no? It suggests that there is a sense of tremendous regard or a tremendous belief that your self-interests are connected to India's destiny and future and to Mr. Modi's leadership. Biden telling Modi that in Tokyo that I need to get your autograph because the number of people who are signing up for your diasporic event is far too big for me to control. My student Dorothy has just submitted her PhD and she's potentially going to be working on ways in which Prime Minister Modi will win again. But no, Dorothy, that's a joke. She's just finished her PhD, so please congratulate her on her submission. But second term, I said there is this electrifying impact. What remains? What is the other big challenge? Ayodhya is done, Kashmir is done, uniform civil code can be done in the special session of parliament. What is going to be the great legacy? Peace in South Asia. The magnet of India today is so strong that they will gravitate to India, if that metaphor is not mixed, like iron filings used to do to a magnet. It's going to happen. Now, Shaurya, the other question. of engagement. There is public engagement and there is public engagement which you can't see. There's track to engagement and there's sequestered engagement. Doval and the previous Sharif, what was his name? The previous chief of the army staff, Pakistan's? Bajwa and his ISI chief were in constant dialogue. That's why you had peace on the LOC for the past 36 months. No infiltration, no cross-firing. So there is work being done, but the work being done behind the scenes will come to the surface when the bridge is ready for the inauguration by the Prime Minister. I can assure you that the third term, in as much as any academic can give any assurance for the future, that this will be the principal agenda. Which doesn't mean that India's international engagement will suddenly disappear, or that India's focus or Modi's focus on domestic constituency will be less, or that there won't be the kind of noises during polls and hustings, but that the main focus will be South Asia. And most countries in South Asia recognize that there is no way out. Look, I'm a skeptic on Kashmir. I'm a complete skeptic on Kashmir because I live in Kashmir. I thought this wouldn't happen. And every day I'm waiting to see when it will erupt, and when it doesn't show any signs of eruption. There is this topper of the IAS, Shah Faisal, who's my barometer of the thermometer of which I judge what's happening in Kashmir. Day 370, he resigned from the IAS, set up his own party, and was flying out of the country, gave a hard talk saying that the choice between for every self-respecting Kashmiri is to either be a stooge or a separatist. And they asked him, what will you be? He says, I'll tell you that. And he was flying up to Turkey. He was detained at the airport, called back, and today he says 370 is over, this is New India. Just look at his Twitter handle. I mean, you don't have to believe me. Or the student leader. I mean, I don't know how this has happened. There's a Sam, Dham, Dandabhed, all to put together. But Shaila Rashid, who used to be a leader here, Samina ji, do you remember her? Now she's suddenly become a part of the mainstream. Now, whatever that you might say, it's all dhand, and it's not the normative power of what's happening. But that's what I'm saying, that there's something happening which, so as good social scientists, even if you are of a strongly left persuasion, you cannot but be blind to. I mean, you can't be blind to a reality which is happening in front of you. What do you tell the Australian cab driver who says, Modi aa gaya, sab theek ho gaya, in downtown Melbourne? So this impact, I think, in terms of legacies, I think Nobel Prizes have been trivialized, but it's a good symbol. If Modi has to win a Nobel Prize, it will be for South Asian integration.
Rightly said, seeing is believing. So, so Professor Mattu, if you can throw some light how the neighbors have begun to see India.
Okay, I mean, I don't know how many of you read the Pakistani press. I read it on a daily basis. I read the Dawn, the News, the Friday Times. Many of the editors I know them well. They genetically hate the RSS. They think the RSS is the closest to fascism reinvented. But everyone grudgingly accepts that that India has taken off, that there is no other way but to engage, and accept either a soft Indian hegemony or a hard Indian hegemony. And most people say, yeah, we have to recognize that the battle over Kashmir seems to be over. I know there are problems, domestic problems also. I know there are issues in domestic. People feel excluded. If you say Ganga, Jamni, Tehzeeb, Abhishek will say, kya koi na Ganga tha, na koi Jamni thi. But the fact was, I think what needs to be done much more, and that's where all of us can play, is to make people realize that it's time to heal and to see how you can build an inclusive India, because the cadre also doesn't understand the Prime Minister's vision. So the cadre has to be, the leader has to control the cadre. The cadre is 5 steps behind the leader. Abhishek ji, आप पूछिए कुछ या comment करिए.
Sir, this is Yamini. I am from CPOD in Political Geography Division. I have this question that given current situation in Manipur and some stalled projects in Northeast, along with non-signing of RCEP, how should we better engage with Southeast Asia and have better relation and ensure peace in that region? Being a leader in
You especially we learned not only by your lecture but by your conduct also, the way you are appreciating everybody. So my question was, you talked about India's role as a Vishwa Guru, sir, you know, and in Sanskrit you quoted some Sanskrit slokas also. In Sanskrit, the term for a guru is acharya, one who teaches by its example. So for peace and conflict in Asia, it is very necessary that there is peace and conflict resolution within India also. And I was very curious, like you talked about Prime Minister Modi's vision uh, of integrating South Asia, but it sometimes confuses us. Like when we hear him, it sometimes feels like his speeches are very intimidating, and like he is working as a pure politician to score those political brownies. Like he talks about those 100 years of slavery in his Red Fort speech recently, and all other things. So I just wanted to get your opinion on that. Thank you so much.
Don't you think this parochial understanding is peddled by the administration in place? So if the vision is so separate and magnanimous, why is there such a duality in domestic politics where we show no magnanimity whatsoever towards our said partners? And if it is for political brownies, then how is it that our vision, which is the vision for the world, going to percolate into every individual, and the individual responsibility that we speak of within the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam framework going to come into play?
Way I remember them. One is something about the Chinese offering us BRI. We should join them because the glass would have at least been half full rather than half empty. I'm telling you, they would have given you an empty glass. So there would have been no question of them actually letting you in or incentivizing it enough for you to be able to match them in any cost benefit, or match that offer in any cost benefit analysis. If you look at the records of the 50s, whether it was in terms of Panchsheel or Bandung, India's reaching out to China was much, much more than India has ever reached out to any other country. Supported China for a membership of the Security Council, conceded Tibet. At Bandung, Nehru kept introducing Zhou Enlai. It came to no effect because Chinese have a historical civilizational understanding of the region and of the world and their place in it, and what they must be and what they should be after what they see is 150 years of imperial humiliation. And in that, they see themselves as the leaders. And they see themselves as having arrived. No longer do they have Deng Xiaoping's view or 24-character strategy of bide and hide as their mantra, but Xi Jinping's strategy that now that you have arrived, now that you have to, now that you are the strongest power, you have to establish the world according to your norms, your interests, and as a way of expanding your influence. So I am completely skeptical about BRI, and no, you could go into granular details and say maybe in the Kashgar Valley they would have given you a little project to some hydroelectrical power company, but in macro terms, in grand strategic terms, I think the Chinese would have conceded very little to India. Then there is the, I think the question about internal conflicts and internal resolution, and also what Dorothy said, which is, look, if you have a vision of peace, harmony, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which I think is expansive and expanding in harmony, these are, I mean, this is an imperfect world. And in this imperfect world, there are imperfect leaders. I'm not saying Prime Minister Modi is perfect. Nor am I suggesting that in order to get votes, in order to mobilize public opinion, in order to win elections, they will not resort to means that you and I find deplorable. Political parties are in the business of winning elections, not losing them in the altar of some moral crusade. So BJP is a political party which wants to win elections. If within the limits of the law it can actually mobilize or isolate or divide, it will, in order to get into power. Does now power temper? That in some ways it has tempered, in other ways it hasn't tempered. But you, as I said, you have to take, if you take a narrow, granular, microscopic view, you will begin to see, as you will see in JNU or in this room, the air conditioner is not functioning. But what I see is this absolute crowd of brilliant, young, fresh minds willing to engage with me and willing to explore new ideas and solutions. I mean, not as a way of reiterating what I've written in the book, which will be soon which is going to be published, but if you look at the dialogue between Krishna and Arjun, that's why it becomes interesting, because it's complex. It's not like Ram. Ram is Maryada Purushottam. Krishna gives you advice, tactical advice. Say under your breath, Ashwatthama has been killed. Get Shikhandi here. Go to Karna and tell him that you will be the ruler of Hastinapur. That you are the eldest son of Kunti. Deceit, you might say. But this is in that divine or deceitful divinity lies the glory of, or the profoundness of Krishna's message, because it's not so simple to understand. In his motley form, Krishna himself suffers at the end. And this brings you to, yes, but you know, the manner in which discourses are shaped by power, knowledge, and the media. Tomorrow, and I've seen this happen in a small place in Kashmir when I was advisor to the chief ministers, how it's a question in India and internationally of manipulation. If the discourse changes, you think the brigade will not change its tune. It's like a Pied Piper. Hegemony, power, and all the knowledge that you can bring into bear when you're in control of the state is frightening in its abilities to be able to shape minds. I thought that's what all fashionable understandings of imperialism were about, that colonization of land, territory, resources was less harmful than the colonization of the mind. Ashish Nandi wrote this great book called The Intimate Enemy. That what they left you with is a sense of Anglophilia, which was much greater than the fact of them having drained all your resources. Every act of, yeah, but manipulation in favor of greater harmony is not evident today. And of course, I get shocked by what's happening in Manipur, the division between the valley and the state and the valley, or what is it called, the region and the valley, or the valley and the hills, the Metis hills and the valley, no, the Metis valley and the Kuki hills. And this you believed was in complete harmony that they used to live together. What is the other question? There was another question which I didn't answer, which was a complicated connection about, yes, yeah, these are, as I said, what happens, continues to happen, offends our sensibilities. Look, I grew up in a JNU. I was a student in JNU. I went to jail in 1982 as part of the student arrests in Tihar. And you can read my essay in the Hindu. I found my place in Tihar jail. It's open, free source. Professor Huck and I was in Periyar warden, as I said. And he this sensibility that he brought to that place, and my experience in JNU has given me a certain sensitivity which is deeply offended by what sometimes happens before your eyes. Sometimes you try and close your eyes, sometimes you shut your mouth, sometimes you try and at least believe, as I do, given that I am a incorrigible optimist, that there is a way of the world. And there is a way of the world which is a way in which finally there will be harmony and peaceful coexistence. I don't have Hobbes' view of the world. I have a view in which dharma will ultimately prevail, whatever you might call it.